It seems once again we ended up here in the woods, exploring and seeing all the spooks and creatures that call the shadows of the forest home. We have 10 more stories shared to us by subscribers just like you, with scary as hell stories from deep within our woods. If you have a story you'd like to share, the email to do so is in the description below. I would love to share your story on the show. Let's get into the stories. When I was young, I was one of those kids who was all about being outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts as soon as I was old enough to join, and stayed in until I was 18. In Boy Scouts, there is a group called the Order of the Arrow, or OA. To my young mind, it was like the special forces of scouting, and I was so excited when I was told I had been selected to join their prestigious ranks. So, I packed my bags and went to camp at Dale Wrestler, New Mexico, and I was ready to see what I would have to do to become an OA. To join OA, you have to go through a trial weekend. I would say not much more of that because the trials that we had to go through are secret. The last night though, we were split up into groups of 4, given map coordinates, a compass, and a bare bone minimum of what we would need, and told to survive for the night, and then to report to a second set of coordinates in the morning. Myself and the 3 scouts started on our way, and we were hiking for about 5 hours before we found a small clearing and confirmed it was our camping spot. From the northeast to the east there was a thick thorny bramble. We tried to find a way to explore it, but the waist-high vines were impossible to get through without something to cut them. So we ignored it and went on just exploring a bit around the camp and goofing off. As night came, we all started to sit down and to make a fire. This would be our only source of light for the night. We stayed up for a bit after dark, chatting and telling stupid jokes, and just having fun, talking before we went to bed. We had one small tent, and so myself and one of the other scouts slept outside near the fire, while the other 2 slept inside. I don't remember the time, because none of us had packed a watch, but it was well after the fire had gone out. I was shaken awake by one of the other scouts. He whispered in a quiet voice that would sometimes crack with fear. There's someone outside our campsite. He then pointed up. Moving from north to east outside the clearing was a bright blue ball of light. The odd thing was, the core was bright, but did not seem to cast a light on the trees. It was more like glowing than producing light per se. I stared at it, nervously and curious, as he quietly belly crawled and woke the other 2 up. "It is just some other group messing around," one of the other scouts said as he rubbed the sleep from his eyes, not trying to be quiet like the first one or I had. The light didn't seem to do anything different from its motions, as the 4th scout said. "But wait, that is where the bramble is." It was then that we realized how smooth the light was moving, and how dead quiet the forest around us was. Nothing was making a noise, and not even the moving light. I watched it for some time before accidentally falling asleep again. When I woke up, everyone else was already packing to make it to the rendezvous point. They said that whatever it was last night made them feel scared, and I was the only one to sleep after seeing it. The rest had remade the fire before it faded away, and they stayed up on watch. Sadly, this is where the excitement of the story ends. We packed up and made it to the point without incident. Before I start this story, let me give you a little insight on myself. I grew up in a very military-strict family. From the moment I turned 5, my dad taught me everything I know now, from fighting to survival skills. My dad being an ex-Navy SEAL, nothing really scares me. I'm not trying to paint myself as the most fearless person in the world, but I am also a paranormal investigator, not something I talk about at work, but after having my fair share of experiences, I grew to love it, and it always interested me. So, from putting away some of the worst people in the world and my fair share of seeing the creepiest shit, nothing honestly scares me. This story takes place several summers ago. Two of my friends, Craig and Justin also being in law enforcement, and the other a firefighter, decided to go camping. I always felt so comfortable in the woods. As I said, my dad taught me everything I know. We would spend days in the woods just living off the land. My friend knew of a very remote area up in New Hampshire. I don't recall the location. I was actually really excited because I hadn't been camping in years. It took us some time to find a good spot to get a good idea of the area. I felt like we were in another planet entirely. We set up our tents, gathered up some firewood, and all of us had brought MREs to eat. We sat around talking for what felt like hours. We all grew pretty tired and decided to head to bed. I settled into my tent and quickly passed out. I was awoken by probably 3 a.m. to this horrible feeling. The only way to explain it is the need to fight, or I was about to die. Now, I always carry a gun on me, my Beretta 92S. It really never leaves my side. I sat up and looked around my tent. It was small enough that there wasn't much space. Here's the creepy part. I remember my father used to tell me to listen to the woods. The animals and night crawlers, they will go silent if something's wrong. You won't hear a single thing, and that's it. I heard nothing. The first time in my life I felt fear. I have had my fair share of demonic hauntings, and this doesn't even come close. I peered out of the tent. We had set the tent up on a good elevation facing an open field, about 100 yards or so away. Mind you, it was full moon and bright as heck. Something was standing there. I can only begin to describe this thing as a mammal, half-lizard thing. The best way I can describe it is that it looked like half of the body of a horse. It had a lizard-like face, and what I can only describe as spikes coming from the back, and one hell of a set of teeth. At first, I seriously thought someone was in a costume messing with us, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was getting from this thing. An unearthly one. I did notice it was looking at something. I couldn't make out what kind of animal it was, but it was probably the size of a raccoon. It looked like it was trying to sneak by, but the animal just randomly fell on its side and just let this thing take it. I was absolutely terrified. I knew if this thing headed our way, no 9mm is going to do anything to it. I could even hear it breathing all the way from my tent. What only sounds like something breathing through pudding. I crawled to my friend's tent keeping a low profile. In a small relief, I noticed my friend Craig was also awake. He was looking at the same thing I was. We waited as the thing just stood there looking around. Then, it started to make its way for the tree lines. We could hear it smashing through the trees, and then silence. Craig and I just laid there for what felt like hours until the sun came up. Still, absolutely terrified. Justin woke up. Of course, he heard nothing and not believing a single word of what we said. We packed up that day, and I have never been back to those woods. I seriously was always afraid to tell this story. I'll probably be sent for a psych evaluation, and I don't care, because I am not making this crap up. I'm a 17-year-old male, living in the Midwest. My sophomore year of high school, my friends peer pressured me into joining the track team. I thought that this was a good idea, because I wanted to improve my stamina. So, due to this fact, I was asked to join the long-distance track team. To practice, our small team would run in the woods, and then to a lake. These woods are mostly used for off-road biking, so we would run in the forest in the dirt paths that the bikes would make. After school, we would run in these woods every day. Time to time, we saw deer. These deer would get very close, so much so that one would only need to take 3 or 4 feet to maybe even pet one. These woods were fun to run in because they could be so secluded. The last day I ran in these woods, it was just another day. Due to my poor stamina, I was pretty far behind the rest of the group, and I had produced a fairly painful side cramp. In fact, I stopped to take a breather. Let me give you a layout of the path I was on. The bike path is cut into a slope, dividing it into 2 parts. The upper half is surrounded in trees, and above that is just more woods. The other half of the slope leads to ponds and more woods. As I was admiring the nature, I heard a loud snap high up in the woods. In so many scary stories, people say they get that feeling where they feel dread or the hair on their neck stands up. This feeling is very real, as I got this feeling. Turning around, I expected to see deer, yet, to my utter horror, I saw a man. The man was pretty far away, but I saw his jeans and long-sleeved checkered shirt. A bit of background on myself. I am currently a 3rd degree black belt in Taekwondo, going on 15 years of practicing martial arts. Still, with my knowledge of self-defense, I was put off and began a light jog. To my utter horror, the man began to sprint down the hill. The creepiest part of his sudden sprint was how he used the trees to propel himself. I suddenly realized why he was running. He was trying to cut me off. Realizing I could not outrun him, I said a silent prayer as I ripped off an old stick of a fallen tree. The man finally made it down the hill. I was face to face with what I believe was a homeless man. The smell was very pungent. His eyes were bloodshot, and he had unkempt beard. I warned him to fuck off, and I raised the stick. The man smiled and said words I will never forget. "All I want to do is play." At this comment, I closed the distance, delivering a kick into his groin. He moaned and began to stumble. I brought down the stick as hard as I could, breaking it over his head. The man fell on the path. With utter fear in my heart, I ran as hard and as fast as I could. My coach was waiting for me at the end of the forest path. She could see that I looked fearful and asked me what was wrong. I smiled weakly and told her nothing, and I decided not to tell my coach anything because I didn't think she'd believe me. After a few days, I decided to tell my parents, who immediately told me to tell my coach. I told her the next practice, and we did not run in those woods again. To this day, over a year later, I still have decided not to enter those woods. In the fall of 2016, a friend and I decided to go hiking late in the afternoon in a densely wooded wilderness area in the mountains not far from Fayetteville, Arkansas. My friend Rick was close to 60 at the time and recovering from a triple bypass he had undergone around 16 months earlier. We had been hiking these trails for about a year following his operation to strengthen his cardiovascular health. That day, a weekday, I hiked with a bottle of water, my wallet, and my keys, but nothing else. Nothing to protect myself. The trail we picked is a popular weekend hiking spot that we had taken dozens of times before. We were both comfortable with the hike and had never had a problem on that path, or any other for that matter. While Rick is older, and at the time a little more feeble after his health problems, I was in my mid-40s, well over 6 feet tall, and in pretty good shape. So, I wasn't really very worried about our safety. The trail we were on is on a state park adjacent to federal park land. It's an outdoors enthusiast's dream. Most of our trek that day was completely uneventful. We just enjoyed the autumn leaves and chatted casually as the sun dropped lower in the evening sky. We had seen nobody else that day, which was probably to be expected given that we chose to hike late on a weekday. We'd completed about 4 miles of the 6-mile loop up to that point, and it was as uneventful as any other. On our way back to the car, and about 2 miles from park area, we spotted someone. Through an opening in the trees, I saw a young woman, probably a college student. She was on the trail ahead of us, and moving in our direction. At first glance, I paid her very little attention. As the distance between us disappeared, that changed. I did not know her, so I could not have mistaken, but there was something about her posture and expression that just seemed off. As she got closer, it struck me that she had some semi-panicked look on her face and was moving quite quickly. But she was in athletic gear, so maybe she was just doing some cardio or something. She occasionally turned her head and stared over her shoulder. I followed her eyes and eventually noted that another woman about 50 yards behind her was walking up the path through the trees. The second woman was not wearing hiking gear. In fact, her clothing struck me as totally inappropriate. It was a warm afternoon, and we were all well inside a wooded state park area for miles away from any homes, but she was wearing semi-formal, office casual attire and a light jacket. I thought the clothes must have been secondhand because they were tattered and ill-fitting, and they definitely didn't look washed. She was a fit, athletic-looking woman who couldn't have been more than 25 or 30 years of age. It was too bizarre. The clothes were wrong for the trail, and they were wrong for the age. Everything about her was off. Her shoes struck me as being even more peculiar. When she got closer, I noticed she was wearing scuffed, leather flats, casual shoes with no ankle support. I found it completely odd, because you just don't see people on this trail just as she was, and you never see them wearing shoes like that. My hiking partner, Rick, hadn't appeared to notice anything odd, as he was completely involved in the conversation and just kept talking. The second woman briefly glanced up, and we made eye contact as she neared us. The alarm bells were going off in my head. There was something in her eyes that made me feel uncomfortable. I don't know what she was thinking, if I'm being honest, but I swear she had contempt in her face. Part of me wondered whether I'd be offending her by staring, so I diverted my eyes and kept walking. I tried to tell myself that maybe she was homeless. Maybe she was wearing the only thing she had, and I was just being rude. But the warning bells were still going off in my head. I'm not a paranoid person, so having my sixth sense going off like that was very unsettling. I have a fantastic peripheral vision, so I turned my face toward Rick and acted like I was listening to him, but I was watching the creepy woman out of the corner of my eye. The moment we passed, she spun her head around to study us, and she slowed her pace. My internal alarms grew louder. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come to a stop and drop her face toward the ground, her body half turned on the trail. It was very odd behavior. Rick and I kept walking around 50 yards further. We made it around a bend in the path, and I looked back at the woman before the trees obscured her view. She was still standing there. Her face was down, but she was staring a hole through us out of the corner of her eyes. That was the first time I realized that I couldn't see her hands. One was inside her jacket pocket, and the other was hidden from my view on the other side of her body. It creeped the hell out of me. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. For half a mile, I didn't see her again, and had begun to wonder whether the first woman, the co-ed, had felt danger as well. Clearly she had, I thought, and that's why she was practically running through the woods at dusk. It also struck me that the woman was stopping and studying Rick and me, like she was deciding on whom to follow. We weren't moving as fast. We were walking as quickly as Rick could manage, and he was clearly more female than a co-ed. But those thoughts amped my senses, and I felt very uneasy, so I periodically checked behind us. At certain points through the woods, I could see more than 100 yards, and nothing. I began to worry about the co-ed. My hair stood up for a second time as I felt the strongest sensation of being watched. Again, thinking I was paranoid and half mocking myself for being afraid of the creepy woman, I turned my head around to assure myself she was not back there. I was wrong. She was there, following with her head down and moving briskly about 100 yards behind us, but with her hands hidden. I turned my head back to the trail in front of us and kept walking, still trying to convince myself that there was nothing out of the ordinary happening. that I was just being rude because she was dressed like a homeless woman. About 200 yards further along the path, I turned my head back to Rick, and my heart raced a bit. She had closed half the distance. Each time we walk around a bend in the woods obscured her location, she would emerge closer and closer to us. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, but nevertheless, I tried to get Rick to pick up the pace. By this time, he was clearly aware that we were being followed, and he was pretty uncomfortable as well. Though, to his credit, he did keep walking. With half a mile to go before we reached the parking area, I turned my head once again, and she was just 10 feet behind us. I hadn't seen or heard her get that close, and it freaked me out. I literally jumped. One of her hands was in her pockets, and the other was behind her back. I got the distinct feeling she had a weapon of some kind, and that she had no fear of, despite the fact that I was considerably taller, albeit several years older. There was no mistaking her demeanor. She meant to do us harm, or at the very least she intended to intimidate us. I weaved my car keys between my knuckles. I handed my water bottle to Rick, and made an obvious fist with my left hand. With a half-mile left in our hike, I thought to myself, if this is nothing, she'll pass us and move on, as clearly she's moving a lot faster than we are. I was accustomed to people overtaking us, but she didn't pass, and never acted like she knew we were there, which was the creepiest part. I kept my head toward her as I walked and tried to get her to make eye contact, but she didn't look me in the eyes at first. She kept acting like neither Rick nor I were on the path a few feet ahead of her, and she'd followed so closely behind. I was completely unnerved, and that made me angry. I wanted her to see how pissed I was, and to convey with a look that messing with me was a mistake. When she finally did make eye contact with me, I glared and clenched my fist. There was an instant where I couldn't read her expression. She was simply blank. But as she studied my face, she appeared simultaneously agitated and a little less confident. I was conveying one thing on my face: back the fuck off. And at this point, I didn't give a damn if it appeared rude. She apparently thought better of whatever she was doing, and slowed her pace so that the distance between us grew to about 20 feet. But she was tense, and kept whatever she had in her hand hidden behind her. I never saw her hands. I knew she had a weapon though, and I believe she meant to do us harm. But I also know she recognized that I was ready to fight. I was mentally prepared to charge at her if I saw a gun or a knife, as I knew Rick couldn't outrun her. I thought to myself, I just have to surprise her. I also realized that I needed to have her in front of us. A few hundred feet further, about a quarter mile away from where our car was parked, she still was stalking us, and I had enough. I was in equal measures afraid and furious. I told Rick that we were going to stop and let her pass, loud enough for her to hear it. Just as I was getting ready to stop on the trail and make her walk in front of us, she veered into a small clearing, plowing through waist-high brush, crossed a ditch and scurried through a tree line to a road that ran through the woods in between the main road and the parking area. I kept my eyes on her the entire time. She had a car. It was parked alongside the little service road, partially hidden by shrubs, not in the parking lot. The last time we made eye contact, just before she climbed in her car, it was clear from the expression on her face that she was very angry. I glared at her, expressing my own anger, and kept walking. When her car started and she drove away, Rick got quiet before asking me, what in the hell was she doing? Did she have a gun? I told him I didn't know. I never saw a weapon. We walked back to our car without saying another word. Once the engine was on and the doors were shut, we chatted a bit more and decided to call the authorities and report the incident, and to make sure to have them check the poor co-ed who had passed first. To this day, I have no idea what the creepy woman was planning to do. I don't know if she wanted to rob us, harm us, scare us, I have no idea. I'm just thankful she decided better of it. I have hiked that trail more than 50 times since then, but I've never seen her again. I live in northern New South Wales, Australia, in an area where the bush is quite dense. Now, I've always been into the paranormal and have experienced a few situations that just cannot be explained. The one I'm about to tell is the most freakiest one so far. So, here's a backstory that links into the story I'm about to tell. So, I live with my parents and my two brothers. About a year back, we were staying with some friends in a tiny desert town with a population of 200. I know, it is very tiny. We heard about an older man who lived in one of the houses and was murdered about 4 years back. The locals suspected the murderer to be a dodgy, dirty homeless man who was lingering around the children and just being completely and utterly creepy, so they kicked him out of the town. This man had a tattoo on his forehead saying, "Mom." Now, fast forward to when we were camping in the bush. We went for a drive on a day that I was going to have a shower in a place where you paid about $2 for a shower if you were camping close by. Anyway, we parked and noticed a man with a small puppy trying to hitchhike. Me, being a nice person, decided to ask him where he was going and let him know my father could probably drive him. Now, when I sit in my back passenger seat, it sometimes looks like I'm the one driving. So, I'm assuming he thought I was alone, as he seemed perfectly fine at first, but then hesitant when he noticed our Rottweiler and the rest of my family. They gave him a lift while I had my shower. I don't know why, but I got a bad feeling. They took a little bit longer than usual. They came back in shock. It was the same fucking man with a tattoo on his head from that small town. We coincidentally bumped into this possible killer who was last seen in a complete different state 4 years ago. He was wearing a hat when I spoke to him, so I didn't see the tattoo. My parents told me how crazy bad the vibes were and how quiet everyone was. They even stopped and dropped him off at a public spot, so they did not feel that safe at all with him. Now, we are driving back to the camp and we're cracking jokes about how we would be waiting back at the camp for us with coffee. My family was terrible with a sense of humor. We got to the camp at light at night and it was dark. We had 2 big tents and we slept in a big kitchen tent. I was somehow still in a bit shaken sense, but I somehow decided to grab a knife and put it next to my bed, just in case. I was cleaning off my knife when I heard something walking behind the tent. I called out to my little brother, and he replied that he was in the campfire with everyone else, including the dog. I suddenly became very frightened, and without even thinking, looked next to me inside the food tent, and the only way I can describe it was that I seen this old, dirty man crouching down in the dark, breathing heavily and looking me dead in the eyes. I froze for a second and screamed like I have never before, and I began running to everyone else. I was getting ready to call the police, but once my dad walked in with a huge stick, it was like he just vanished. It was just like it didn't make sense. There was so much food in that tent that no one could have really been in it without crushing everything. Plus, nothing was even moved when we looked inside. When things settled down and we couldn't find anything around, we eventually all tried going to sleep. After about 10 minutes of trying to sleep, and still horrified from whatever the fuck I had just seen, I started hearing footsteps around the tent. It went on for about 5 minutes. I listened very carefully. This thing had 2 feet, and it sounded heavy and big. To try and possibly scare it off, I told my brother very loudly to grab the knife and see what's outside. Everyone else admitted to hearing it also. My dog started barking and followed my brother outside. She then chased whatever it was into the forest. My brother couldn't see it, but he said it was running our dog, and it sounded as if it were dragging something heavy. After about 15 minutes, we tried going back to sleep. Just before I managed to get some sleep, a voice from outside very faintly said my dog's name. My dog didn't make a sound for the rest of the night. Now, I don't know if this had absolutely anything to do with that day, but I fell asleep that night and my face towards the tarp wall. I had the craziest, vivid nightmare. I'll try to explain the nightmare as I can. It was like I was face to face with an autopsy of a young blonde American girl. She was speaking into my ear, going into details about how she was murdered, how her body was found, and how good her life was beforehand. I tried looking away from the body, but everywhere I turned my head, I was just looking at a different part of the body while she still spoke. This dream went on until she said a name of a man, and then I woke up. I don't remember the name, and it was not familiar to me. Anyway, that was probably the scariest, strangest night I have ever experienced, and I no longer enjoy camping. I hope you enjoyed my story as much as I enjoy listening to everyone else's experiences. This story happened to me when I was hiking in the woods. It was about 3 a.m., so there was no light yet. There is rarely people up there, and there are no trails. It's mostly trees and hills and wild cows. I was walking down a hill and I thought, why not do some exploring? So I decided to go down a few more hills until I was on flat ground. I looked around and saw what looked like a trailer. I decided to go into it. I had my gun in my hand, just in case some crazy bear or something tried to kill me. Anyway, when I was inside the trailer, I nearly threw up. It smelled like sulfur, but extremely bad. I walked further into it and saw a bed, a bag, and some books on black magic. Then I left because I couldn't stand that smell anymore. I left the trailer and continued walking. I came across a house, well, maybe a bit bigger. I was like, why not go in there? And so I went in. I saw the same books and I was kind of creeped out. Then I went upstairs and saw that there was some stuff on the second floor. I heard something move and I got a terrible feeling of bad energy. Then I decided to yell for whatever reason at whoever was up there. I said, "I know you're up there, motherfucker. Say something." But there was complete silence. I shot my gun through the roof and, this time, heard a scuffle. The sun had started rising now, so I decided it was best to leave. Before I left, I saw something written on the stair. It said, "House of Spirits." I booked it out of there, and I felt the same feeling of being watched and scared. I turned around and there was a man on the roof. He was staring at me. He had a long beard and long hair. He was smiling at me, and I felt so disturbed. I shot at the man and yelled at him, but he kept smiling. I ran back to keep an eye on him, and I booked it into the truck. I always see that man around town, but I guess he doesn't recognize me. A few years have passed and my father's friends know him. He is always at the library. He gives everyone bad vibes and stuff, but I'm lucky to be alive. He was a devil worshipper and could have killed me, and no one would have known where to find our car. Anyway, I won't be going near their house again. This happened about 2 to 3 years ago. I live in northwestern Montana, and it was my senior year summer. And I was going through some personal stuff that year, and I thought the best way to escape from that was to get off the grid and go camping in the forest. My plan was to go on a hiking trail that not a lot of people hike on, and get to this small campsite. I packed my gear that everyone brings on hiking trips: food, water, tents, bear spray, etc. When I left, it was after work and it took a couple hours to reach the beginning of the trail. The hike was 10 miles into the forest, which had winding paths, rocky areas, and thick and overgrown brush that at times was hard to see the trail because of how overgrown the trail has been with the lack of people taking it. The trail just led you deeper into the mountains. The hike was pretty uneventful until I reached the campground. When you come out of the trail into the campground, the first thing you see is a small open area about 30 to 50 feet, just enough to hold a couple tents. And when you look in front, you can see a small lake with trees packed together tight, and it's hard to see through right above the Rocky Mountains, sticking up high in position to where the sun goes over. The surrounding area is covered in pine trees, making it hard to see more than 20 feet in front of you. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast in the mountains. When I reached the campground, I set up my tent right away because the sun was going down fast, and with the mountains there, it grew dark quick, and since I have had nothing to eat, I got a fire going and put some food on. And here's where it starts to begin. Nightfall came. The night was calm, and just a small breeze was coming to make the trees just move enough to where it starts to make croaking noises. The night was pretty chilly, and I made a pretty good fire. About an hour into the night, I got this foul smell that just seemed to linger around. It must have been coming from the wind, is what I thought anyway. But the smell was strong, and felt like it was right next to me. I threw another log on the fire, and then I hear the scream of what sounded like a woman next to me coming from the direction where the wind was coming from. At least, I think. It freaked the hell out of me, because I thought I was the only person up here. I didn't see any other tents, and there's no place to set up tents other than the spot I'm in, and the scream didn't come from the trail I came from. The visibility that night came from the campfire and the moon reflecting off the lake, so I couldn't see far. But I reached into my backpack and pulled out a flashlight and just slowly started scanning the area for a woman. I yelled back, "Are you okay? What's wrong?" And the woman yelled back, "Help me!" So I said, "Where are you? Are you hurt?" Trying to find the source of the sound. There was a small pause, and then she yelled back, "Come here!" But there was something off about the voice. I just kept thinking to myself, that woman didn't sound like she was hurting or anything was really attacking her. So that raised a red flag in my mind, and everything I said seemed like it didn't matter to the woman. Like she was just trying to lure me out of the campsite with some 2 words. "Help me!" Right after that, I reached into my backpack and pulled out my handgun and kept scanning the forest. After a bit, I could hear far in the distance elk making noises, and right after the elk finished, I hear the loudest high-pitched screech that I've ever heard in my life, in the same direction the girl was yelling at me from. And after the screech, I hear movement in the direction of the elk, with the bushes moving violently until the bushes became unmoving and the campground came to a standstill again. After the thing ran away, the foul smell went with it, and though the rest of the night was calm, except for the same screeching in the distance which sounded like it was miles away, just echoing through the mountains, I have never been more scared in my life. So, I waited until dawn, packed up my things, and headed home. I haven't told anyone my story, but if you have any idea what this could be, please let me know. I guess I should start by saying, this happened in early September of 2016. I'm a 25-year-old female that lives in a really rural part of northern Arkansas with my fiance, near the lake to be exact. It's gorgeous, lots of open farmland, plenty of woods, and barely any neighbors. It's what my soul always wanted. I am an only child, also, and have been pretty much spoiled my whole life. My father, for as long as I can remember, would randomly bring home toys. Not just little toys. I'm talking go-karts, dune buggies, and even four-wheelers. So, since I was young, I knew how to drive just about any off-road vehicle, and I loved it. We even had jet skis at one point. My parents were very laid back with me, to the point that they would nap during the day and let me ride the dune buggies until dark. I forgot to mention, I just recently moved full-time to the property. For years, we would only visit the land on the weekends, so it's a different feeling knowing you don't have to go back to town. My parents live about 3 hours away from the land, so seeing them on the weekends is a treat. They bring up all kinds of goodies. The land is beautiful, about 30 acres more than half of which is cleared. Years ago, a small farm was here. The old barn still stands, and of course a pond with a ton of frogs. One night, we all got wild hair and decided to go for a night ride. My father now has a Jeep, so him and my fiance decided to ride together. Me and my mother decided to ride separate on the wheelers. These four-wheelers are fairly new, automatic, so they are ready to ride a while. And damn it, I also forgot to mention that for miles outside of the property is the Cherokee Wildlife Reservation, so there are miles and miles of woods and dirt trails. So many that you could be gone all night. Behind the property, about 20 minutes out, is a creek. Once you pass through it, you will go up the mountain on the other side of Cherokee. There's also a crap ton of logging roads, But before you get to the logging trails, there's a dirt road you have to take. I have taken this road for years. I have had some weird feelings out there, but this night will be the night that I will always remember until I die. My dad, fiance, uncle, and aunt had gone ahead of us, 5 minutes ahead of us to be exact. My mother and I had been out making a drink. Yes, my wheeler was a cup holder, and I was gonna bring alcohol with me, damn it. After we passed through the creek and up the mountain, I noticed the beams of my mother's wheeler start to dim. Normally, they do this because your fan 2 cool engine has kicked on, so I didn't think anything of it. I want to let you know that there are houses near the end of this road and near the beginning, so there's a gap of about 5 miles long of woods, and an occasional dirt road for gas as well. By the way, gas wells are everywhere up here. As we get closer to the trail we are supposed to take, my mother's wheeler starts backfiring. We stop for a second to see what's going on, when it dies. Now, like I said, I've been out in these woods my whole life. I wasn't afraid at all. No weird things or feelings or anything. My mother calls to my dad and tells him what's going on, but no calls are getting through. They must be going down the mountain, my mother said with an aggravated tone. I turn off my wheeler, but leave the lights on. The road is narrow, so narrow that 2 cars can barely squeeze by. I don't want some drunk guy flying around the corner and not seeing us. As my mother tries calling my dad again, I start looking at her wheeler. Something isn't right with it. There's power to it, but no fuel is getting to the engine, which could be a lot of things causing that. So I get my phone out and text my fiance, letting him know we were stuck in the middle of the road. We were sitting there for a good 10 minutes, when all the hairs on my body start to stand up. I immediately look in the direction of the headlights to see a man walking from the pitch darkness. He had no light, and he said nothing. It took a second for my brain to register what I was seeing. As my mother finally got my dad on the phone, I whispered to her sternly, "Mom, there's a guy walking up on us." Now, my mother tends to panic at times. I never took my eyes off him. He was still far enough away that I couldn't make out much features. My mother is freaking out and I tell her to leave the shit and jump on my four-wheeler. As she does, I yell to the guy who is obviously getting closer, "Hello, what the hell?" He said nothing. This seriously freaked me out. Like, who the hell walks down a pitch dark road in the middle of the night without a light? And not say something as you approach other strangers. That's when it dawned on me. He must have been creeping in the woods down the road. Voices echo like crazy out there, so he probably knew we were women. Normally, I keep a .38 on me, but my silly ass left it at home. Out of all times, this would be the one time that I forgot it. I start my wheeler up and my mother hops on. The man is still getting closer. Now I can make out a red flannel shirt and dirty jeans, dark hair, but not much more. He had a gun. Not in his hand, but visible on his hip. He still wasn't saying a word, which makes us kind of panic even more. He also was not looking at us, but rather at the ground. I realize I can't back up because I can't see a damn thing behind us. So, I threw it in high and took off past him. As we passed him, he just stood there, facing and following our direction, yet never looking up at us. It was pretty disturbing. We make it near to the creek and my mother was able to tell my dad everything. He immediately turned around when he heard us yelling. He was at the wheeler in about 4 minutes. As we met back at the wheeler, the guy is there, on his own wheeler. My mother and I just sat there, staring at this weirdo. He never gave me or my mother eye contact, and ended up heading to the creek to talk. As we all shut our vehicles off, my dad asked us, "So, where did he come from?" I told him, the darkness. He just walked up without a light from the road. My fiance chimes in. He had a wheeler in and tow straps. Y'all didn't talk to him or anything? My mother and I just stared at him, with open mouths. This guy was going to take our wheeler. He never asked us if we needed help. He didn't say or do anything but act weird. The man had told my dad his wife heard people yelling in their driveway. We didn't even pass their driveway. The next day, me and my fiance head to the same spot to check out this driveway. We reached just about halfway there when the four-wheeler had died. and just a few hundred yards down the road was an overgrown driveway. We drove up and decided to walk the rest of the way. Tucked far behind the woods was a rundown barn-like cabin, with no power, no vehicles, and no signs of recent life, and definitely no sign of a wife. There was an outhouse behind the barn. As we walked up to the windows, we noticed the man's wheeler sitting behind the barn. I looked at my fiancé, who had a worried look on his face. Inside the barn was stuff that you would expect to see in a garage, no indication that someone was living there. As we backed away slowly, I started to notice that there were vans hidden in the woods, like a homestead. They were run down, and I'm pretty sure they didn't run, but still. And that's when my fiancé grabbed my hand and we quickly got back to the Jeep. On the way back home, I told him about the vans. He said that he noticed them too. He noticed them at the same time he noticed the man, staring at them from inside the barn. Always bring protection if you're going to be in the middle of nowhere. One time, while driving in the middle of nowhere in France with a friend, the whole night just felt so eerie for some reason. I won't get into all the prior details, but when we parked in front of our hotel, it was strangely quiet and dark. All of a sudden, a group of people in a trance-like state started walking out of the woods from different areas all around the parking lot. The woods were just about a foot away from where we parked our car. It was so creepy and intense. The first person to come out of the woods was a lady. She didn't even acknowledge us as she walked right in front of and beside our car. She was so tranced out. More people hide in the woods than you would think or imagine. Another day, I was walking in the woods in my backyard. I often walked alone in there feeling safe and solace. Once I was pretty far in, I turned around a bend and was scared out of my wits to see a naked man just laying there on the side of the path. He must have been slinking his way through the woods to get there before I did, or maybe he was just laying there for a long time, just waiting for someone to see him or walk into him. I ran like a bat out of hell, thinking he was going to kill me. It's safe to say there are a lot of creepy people as well as creepy creatures lurking out in the woods just outside of our homes. Before I tell you my story, I must give you a bit of background. I live in the state of Idaho in the US. I work on a farm and live in a very small town and live just down the road, about an hour from where this happened. But when I heard a story from a neighbor, curiosity got the best of me. My friend Bill told me the story of the water babies. We were at my house in the garage. Bill was talking with my dad about fixing something in the house. The talk moved on to hunting stories, then stories about seeing weird things in the woods. My dad has a ton of stories like that handed down from my grandpa. After a few stories, Bill told the tale like this. You see, the story behind the water babies is that two main native tribes in the area, the Shoshone and the Bannock, or as they call themselves, the Shobans, would perform an ancient ritual. Nobody remembers any specifics of the ritual. It's lost to history, but the purpose is fairly well known. Whenever a set of twins were born, the Shobans would take the babies to the marsh where the Blackfoot and Snake Rivers joined. They would throw the babies in the water, and the one that floated was kept, and the ritual was ended. The belief is that the twin is good and the other twin is evil, and they believed that the good one would float to the surface, but this meant a lot of babies drowned, whether one or both the twins died. Anyways, it is said that if you drive to Tilden Bridge, which overlooks the smaller of the two rivers, and shut your car off, you will hear odd noises, small thuds and thumps, as if something is crawling all over your car. I have heard of water babies before, and seen the Tilden Bridge, but I never joined and put the two together in my mind. After Bill told us what water babies were, he told me that after his brother experienced the noises and his friends, they drove away from the bridge on a dirt road. The next morning, Bill's brother got up to find his car not only caked in dust, but covered in small hand footprints. I scoffed at this. It's a fairly lesser-known local legend, although old-timers are dying out, so it's not as well known anymore. And I never believed it. Until one night 2 years ago. A group of me and my friends. I was the one driving, and my cousin in the cab, and my girlfriend in the middle front seat, her best friend in the passenger, and the other 2 girls were in the back. We wanted to spook out the girls, and in all honesty, we all were pretty creeped out as it was. We told them we were looking for ghosts and it was a moonlit night, so if we did see anything, we would be kind of screwed. This amped up the fear of the unknown factor big time. I was driving, so I parked and turned my pickup off the middle of the bridge. It is a rarely used bridge due to it being in the middle of nowhere, so I felt comfortable parking on the bridge. We sat in the darkness for a minute expecting something to freak us out. The car was full of us kids being loud and goofing off, so it wasn't too creepy. After a minute or 2, we decided to leave nothing, because it was too spooky and nothing was happening. The mist of the river rolled over my truck's windows, which made everything look more horrifying. To tell you the truth, we all decided to do something else, so I turned the key and nothing happened. The girls thought I was playing around and telling me to push it in the clutch or just joking. Idiots, let's go. My girlfriend told me, not funny, okay? Just go. I told them that the car was an automatic and had no clutch. The girls grew quiet, and I saw them go pale in the moonlight. I tried for about a half an hour to get the car to start, but it just wouldn't work. I was too scared to get out and pop the hood. Everyone was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. I kept turning the key, and my girlfriend's best friend in the passenger seat had her window down a small bit. Through the small slit of the window, we heard a baby screaming not too far from the river bottoms. Mind you, we were miles from the nearest town or any farms, so it couldn't have been some baby a little ways off, because we were in the middle of nowhere like I said before. We were literally like a half an hour from the nearest town. We then started hearing soft thuds and bumps of the roof and hood of the truck. We all freaked out after a few turns. The engine still wouldn't go, until we heard a thud and felt the truck move forward a bit. I turned the key one last time and it started up. We pulled out of there as fast as we could over the dirt road. We were all done with doing anything else that night, so I took everyone home. When everyone was dropped off at home, I drove back to my house, parked the truck in the driveway, and ran inside. The next morning, my dad yelled at me for letting kids climb over the truck during the night. I told him I wasn't even near any kids last night. He led me to the driveway to the truck and said, "See all the hand and footprints all over?" The truck was covered in dust from the dirt road, and as he pointed to it, I noticed small handprints and footprints on the hood and in the bed. It's been 2 years, but I will never go back to Tilden Bridge again. I have experienced some weird crap in my life, but all I know is that I believe in Bill's story.